Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today is a very special episode. I have a very special guest with me today, the co-producer of such cult 80s films as Spookies and Street Trash. It's Frank Farel.
I thank you for the introduction, and I thank you very much for inviting me onto your show.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. Obviously, we've been talking about doing this for a little while now. There's just been
Right,
kind of issues either side, and I'm just glad to finally.
right. Well, here's a question I have to ask. In our back and forth online, you're
Yeah,
one of these people who decides to opt for audio messages, right?
yeah, yeah.
Do you still feel that's just that's just something you prefer? Because I see it here and there, and it seems to me a much more efficient way to talk, even if you're not going to have a direct conversation.
Yeah, I think it's become a force of habit for me. I think it's really
Mhm.
become. I've just never been a massive texter, so I try to keep my
Yeah.
videos as short and sweet as possible. But I know it annoys some people. So to the people that do actually find it annoying, I don't audio clip them.
Right.
Um, but yeah, typically, yeah, kind of short and sweet little audio clips,
Yeah,
and
I at this point I just like speak things into the phone or computer and
yeah.
hope they turn out close to what I actually said.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about some of the projects and that you've worked on, and we're going to talk about. I'm going to ask you the question that you've probably been asked 9 million times before.
Okay.
What kind of lured you to the film industry? What got you into the film industry?
I developed an interest in film. I mean, I think as a young kid, I always had an interest in I went to the movies all the time. I grew up on certain old movies on TV. But I think around the age of 12, 13, I got very interested in horror, science fiction,
Mm,
literature, as well as, movies and everything,
yeah,
pretty much. So I just wanted to consume as much as I could. And that's really what opened it up. That was my gateway,
yeah,
but since then I'm a fan of like everything and anything practically.
yeah. So basically, I mean, obviously, the first film that you worked on was obviously known as Spookies. I believe it
Well,
started.
that was the first film I had a uh, really central role in.
Okay,
I had worked on other things. Myself and my partners walked onto a production that was in the midst of shooting and one day, and then a few weeks later, we were involved in helping them make it. My partners were co-directing
yeah.
scenes, and that was Igor and the Lunatics, which was released by Troma.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. Okay,
Right.
that's interesting.
I mean, I'd been really making all efforts since about the age of 17, 18 to try and get to like, oh, let's make a first feature film because the unwritten rule at that time was, oh, if you make a horror film, of course you'll make a profit, then you'll get to make more movies,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's like just make it cheap enough and whatever else.
yeah. So you
Um,
almost guaranteed a degree
yeah,
of
I mean, it
profit, and
wasn't really quite as simple as that, but
yeah,
it was probably a more reliable formula than it may be now. Now with so many people doing their own video movies, there's just an endless parade of stuff out there. I
there
think.
is. And with streaming services, and I mean, films are just there are so many films being churned out now. More than ever right now. And obviously, at the time, this was the 80s. Now, I know that the movie Spookers originally started life as Twisted Souls. Now,
It,
as you know, as I told you recently, I'll admit, I'm ashamed to admit, I'd never seen Spookies up until last week.
the only odd thing about that is that you're British, so you should have had it lurking around you nearby
I
somewhere.
know, yeah. But it was a film that somehow escaped me somehow. I'd heard of it, I just never actually watched it.
Well, part of the problem with that, well, although as I said, you being in the UK, you had more access to it.
Mm,
Here in the States, it was released by the Sony Video Corporation. It was Sony's first attempt to have a film or video unit, and Spookies was their first theatrical film.
yeah,
And the truth is that it was. I'm trying to think of exactly, was it 80. I think it came out here in 86 theatrically and then on
yeah,
video a few months later. And they did really well. They sold a lot of copies. They were
mm,
very vocal about that to me.
yeah,
They made a lot more profit than is in anything recorded on internet. I mean, like for instance, on the Wikipedia page and on the IMDb, it claims the film made like under $18,000 worldwide. Meanwhile, I have the full page 50 top films at the box office from Variety that has it on there, and it's made $30,000 just in a particular week in a part of the country. So it wasn't exactly that. Sony claimed, they told me they made a couple of million in profits on it.
Yeah. So with the internet, you can never quite, but especially Wikipedia, because Wikipedia can actually be edited by anyone, can't it?
Well, it can. At the same time, a lot of times the people who make the films will just give information based on whatever they want the public to think.
Yeah. Now, a friend had told me about it, and he actually said that the making of the movie, is every bit as interesting as the film itself. And I watched it. Obviously, I told you that I was going to buy it on Blu-ray, and I purchased it, and I watched it on the very day that it arrived. And I really enjoyed it. I can see why this film has a cult following, certainly. And I know it does have a fan base. It very much is a cult movie.
Apparently it has for a number of years. I mean, it sort of has really kind of begun to explode a bit with the release of the film in legitimate video versions. But as I was saying earlier, there was no video release of the film in this country since its original one.
Yeah. In
the late 80s. And so you had to rely on old VHS copies, which are apparently very valuable now.
Yeah.
And then, YouTube had it up there in, the usual sort of subpar visual quality. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we had, as you know, a very difficult time making the film, went through a lot, came away feeling like we had failed and that what was released was not our film really after it was worked over. But, it's been a real education and a change in my way of seeing things, just to get so much positive response.
Yeah.
To have so many people say, well, either this was a part of my childhood, or I saw this and it became one of my favorites years ago.
Yeah.
And I have people, contact me and just, almost daily say stuff like this. And this is so much not what we went through for so many years. I mean, we had no one we could go to and whine about it, really. So
yeah,
we didn't talk about the film that much. I mean, it was not something that I was able to say free and clear, oh, well, yeah, this film turned out fine and I feel great about it. I mean, I feel, for instance, much better about Street Trash, certainly.
Yeah, which came out the following year, I believe, 87.
That was a case where there was, creatively, there were not enormous restraints. Aside from the budget, there was a lot of cooperation and a real team spirit to just make everything as good or as weird or as funny as possible.
Yeah.
And while the same thing was certainly taking place on Spookies, on almost any film, we just had someone overseeing us that cast a shadow. And it really, especially for someone like myself who had to, on a daily basis, deal with, all right, how do we overcome the next obstacle that we know will be placed in our paths?
It must be really frustrating, because I could clearly tell that you were putting your heart and soul into this project, into this movie, and to have someone come along and basically chop it to pieces, if you will, butcher it to a degree, and you're putting all of your heart and soul into this movie. And it seems to be a common thing, even for some big budget films out there.
Yes, it is.
And it's a real shame, because it seems that the directors aren't being the studio, for example. No director is bigger than the studio itself, and the studio is calling all the shots. And the name, I believe it's Jeannie Joseph.
Jeannie or Eugenie. It was actually a pseudonym for her, as she had a more prominent career as an adult film actor.
Oh, okay.
Prior to making this.
Yeah.
And I mean, based on, during the time it was happening and in subsequent years, I mean, I've gotten a lot of sort of information about her and behind the scenes, etc. And, as we pretty much go into in the documentary, it was just someone seeing an opportunity and not having any qualms about what they did to someone else's work.
I know, it's pretty disgusting. I mean, the thing is, she came on, I believe she was an editor, wasn't she? She was an editor.
Well, she had because she had started out as a performer. She had started doing some behind the scenes stuff. She may have directed some, X-rated material.
Yeah.
Um, she has a couple of other feature film credits, including Invasion of the Mindbenders.
Okay. Yeah. Um, Now, I remember a title actually being thrown out during this film because I know obviously Twisted Souls is what it started off as. Was it the Bowel Eruptor?
Oh,
Greatest
no,
title.
that was just our producer, our backer. I hate to call him a producer since he doesn't actually have a producing credit on the film.
Okay.
And while people who supply money will frequently take a producer's credit,
Yeah.
I see him more as the backer because ultimately it came down to it was his money and we had to answer to him for everything because it was his money. And I don't object to that.
Yeah.
I just object to an unrealistic approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, I will say this like right off the bat. What I really liked this film, and obviously, I think the setting was really good, which was the John Jay estate, I believe.
Yeah, and that interestingly, because we lived in Westchester County in Upper New York
Mm.
State, and we were looking for a place that was we all lived in different towns, but within a close
Yeah.
distance. And we were looking and looking for something, and we started looking, and we had another place we wanted to use, which I believe was in Connecticut at one time. It was actually a place we had looked at and had another film in mind for it. And the fact is, before we did Spookies, we had another sort of old house thriller type thing, which was really about. It was a much more simplified thing. It was a sort of an overall action adventure horror piece about a demonoid monster running around a mansion. And I think that was a much better script. It was,
Okay.
it was something that we actually had like a little bit of heart and tried to, with Spookies. I forget how far we go into it in the documentary, but it was like once we arrived at the agreement that we were going to do this and sign contracts, we wrote a script in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And we did not do any major revisions whatsoever.
All right.
Which is not normal in any way.
No, no. So, I mean, there was this film you were talking about. Was that pertaining to a title called Hellspawn?
Hellspawn, yeah, was the demon in the house film. We had a few of the same actors. Some of the actors that were cast in Spookies were people that we knew, specifically had met on the film Igor and the Lunatics.
Okay.
And and to tell the truth, I was taking a producer's role, and my partners were co-directing, and I had input into everything. But I sort of wanted, I felt it was important that they just felt comfortable and okay with people in the cast, and and certain other things. So I'd say we had like maybe half the cast members were folks that we knew.
Yeah.
There's also the other matter, and I have to bring this up because it just never fails. At virtually every review, every synopsis I've ever read says a bunch of teenagers arrive at a mansion.
Yeah.
Show me a teenager.
Yeah, they're not. It's the common trope for most films.
It is, but it's
they're
like
always actors playing. They're always much older than.
But is it so ingrained in people's minds that like virtually any group of people that shows up someplace where they're essentially cannon fodder to be killed, that they're in reality they're teenagers?
Yeah, yeah. Because there was one actor on set, Peter Dane.
Yes.
Who really kind of stood out because he's a much older.
He was older. I mean, to tell the truth, he was in Igor and the Lunatics.
Okay.
And we cast him just because he was, I mean, Michael wanted a bunch of teenagers. He wanted a clone of the Evil Dead in one form or another. And we had, we did everything we could to try and, veer him one way or another, or try and be more original. And he would be very adamant. And he had literally a list of stuff that he wanted in the film. And that's a lot of what's in there. Where we did have a great deal of freedom is in creating the monsters and making.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Actually, what I liked,
as unique as possible.
Yeah, what I liked about this film, actually, there's obviously a lot of different monsters thrown into this film, and I actually think that the practical effects are actually pretty good.
I hope so. I hope so, because the whole film was built around them, and that was the idea that we felt from the start. That it was like, all right, we don't have the ability to do everything else the way we'd like. We can at least, and these were people that we primarily knew and had worked with to one extent or another.
Yeah.
That we said, all right, we know we can have above average special effects for a film within this budget range, and that should really bring it some attention.
Yeah. One of the monsters that really stood out for me, actually, I really like the Grim Reaper. I really like the look of the Grim Reaper in the movie, and the demon snakes as well,
Right,
which
right.
reminded me of a very kind of creature from the Black Lagoon-esque.
Yes, I guess in some of the features, maybe that's John Dodds, who also created the spider
Yes,
creature and all
yeah.
and all the transition stages of the woman into a spider.
Mm,
Uh, and then there is the fact though that, I mean, even though those scenes are still able to stand out and have brought the picture, I think, most of the positive attention
yeah,
that it's gotten, that it really satisfies people who appreciate that type of work.
yeah,
you know but I can't help but, like, recall that uh in our original, I mean, we originally had a very, very elongated rough cut that needed to be cut in half almost.
yeah.
But all of the monster scenes were longer. They were intended to take place more slowly. They were, if you look at the film now, almost every one of those creature scenes happens within like a minute to 30 seconds.
Yeah, very quick success. Yeah,
There's, for instance, there's no final shot of the spider creature with all of its legs out.
no, yeah,
I mean, we have photographs of it. We can prove it existed, but it's not in the film.
yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. There was also, I believe, in early development, was there talks of something like tales that tear your heart out? I believe it was.
Variously known as tales to tear your heart out, or tales that will tear your heart out.
Yeah.
That was, well, as you know, I made Street Trash with Roy Frumkes, who also wrote the script for that. And I went to one of the schools I went to was the State University of New York at Purchase.
Yeah.
And I went to a film class there, and he was teaching. It was essentially film history. And then I think I also, after that, I took a film production course. But we got along splendidly because we were both real movie buffs.
Yeah.
And his idea was to make a feature film under the auspices of the college,
Okay.
and to bring students into it and do an anthology horror film,
Yeah.
and have students direct some episodes, and then to bring some of his friends and connections in the industry in to direct other episodes.
Yeah.
And the film got, like almost halfway completed in terms of stuff shot and everything else, and then it fizzled and it never went anywhere. The school seemed to be kind of uncertain what they felt about it, and they sort of withdrew a certain amount of support.
Yeah.
But the film exists. I mean, I directed an episode. My Spookies partner Brendan Faulkner, who co-directed Spookies, directed an episode, and and a couple of other people that he felt were capable of it. And then professionals such as Wes Craven were brought in, and
Okay.
and his episode was one of the only ones completed.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Also,
and,
kind of
it's
getting back
been
to
mentioned over the years that we should try and do something with this footage, but Roy has all the footage. He seems to be indeterminate on what he might or might not do with it.
Yeah, because speaking of anthologies are they're one of my favorite subgenres of horror. I absolutely love anthologies, and there's actually something in your film that reminds me of the original 72 Tales from the Crypt. Now, maybe I'm just reading into it. It's the young boy that's wearing a brown robe.
I can claim no responsibility for this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, our film was about the people who are driving around, come to the mansion in the cemetery, and go inside, and then are knocked off.
Okay.
The additional scenes shot as a framing, quote unquote, story, really to be honest, in my blunt opinion, just to pad the film out and give this other person a directing credit.
Yeah, yeah. Because I know one of the scenes that I'm assuming a lot of people weren't happy with was the Mudmen, which I actually thought looked great. I loved the look of the Mudmen in it.
Again, that scene's cut like to about a quarter of whatever the original length was.
Okay.
It happens really fast. I don't even think I'm not sure you're even aware how many muckmen there are in that scene.
I thought it looked like there was about 3.
There are, but the way it's cut, it looks more like 2.
Yeah, with
because it's stuff. So much of what we originally had there is cut out, that it's like there are times where it cuts from one shot to another, and one muckman seems to be the same Monkman, but he's not. He's actually another Monkman.
Oh, right.
You
And
know, and that was a scene. Also, obviously, that was the scene that's infamous for the farting soundtrack.
yeah. I was going to
Yeah, and
say that was really kind of like, I mean, that was put in for comedic effect, I'm guessing,
it was actually, despite the protests of the other director.
Mm,
But once again, our backer thought that was just the funniest thing conceivable
yeah,
and demanded it. And I just told this to somebody not too long ago in speaking to them. The scene itself, I always thought, well, all right, there's farts, but like it's just nothing but farts. It's like
yeah,
it doesn't stop for the entire scene.
yeah.
The reason for that is it's on the music track.
Oh, okay.
It's part of the music.
I really don't see the logic of adding that to it. I mean, I still like the scene overall. I know it's not the scene that was intended, which is a real shame. But the inclusion of them noises, it kind of felt like it was a sitcom almost.
It's
It's
just I think it takes you out of the movie like
mm,
completely for that moment where you're just going, you don't know what is the intention of this thing that's now
mm.
happening.
I know there was also another moment in the film as well where the characters' names are escaping me. They run out of the house and they're like that, and
Right.
they end up running. And from what I understand from the documentary, is that there were going to be ghosts and so forth flying
Yeah,
around.
there were these phantasms shooting back and
Yeah,
forth, and part of what we with some of our personnel were supposed to be doing, but when we left the film, that became something that Michael would have had to probably hire an effects house to do, and get a huge bill that he didn't want, which is
yeah,
why he was somehow talked into spending another large amount of money to make almost an entire new film.
yeah. I will say as well, I believe the character's name is Carol, the one that becomes,
Right.
demonically possessed. I thought the makeup effects on her face were great. Um, and I'm assuming that was obviously your um doing. That
That
wasn't.
was that was our stuff. All the stuff with the board itself was all
Yeah,
our stuff. It came down to, when we left the film, they tried to bring the cast back for reshoots with this new director. They all maintained loyalty to us, thankfully.
yeah,
Uh, and so I think somehow it was arrived at the decision to spend. It depends on which lie you believe. I've heard like $125,000 to shoot the rest of it. I've also heard a $500,000 in an interview with Jeannie Joseph, and I don't believe that.
I remember seeing it was very kind of Evil Dead esque, and which was obviously proved to be an inspiration.
Right. Well, as I said, but bear in mind, it wasn't so much an inspiration as we were told. This is what you do.
Okay, yeah,
And we tried to vary this and that and whatever else, but he wanted certain key things that in his mind spelled profit at the box office.
yeah. Well, I sat there seeing Carol, demonically possessed, and I'm like, I swear I've dated her before.
Well,
I,
yes,
I, I
believe me, she
swear
was.
that was an ex.
I hate to say this, but the actress was more difficult out of makeup. Meaning she was not an easy person to work with in certain ways.
Okay. Now, I just want to quickly talk about some of the other things prior to Spookies. Now, I realized that you were a zombie in George Romero's Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, myself, and then again, Brendan Faulkner, co-director of Spookies. I forget how we heard it. Well, actually, Roy Frumkes, who I mentioned before, who the Street Trash writer producer, was doing a somewhat well-known documentary, Document of the Dead,
Okay.
which was about. I mean, there have been since, to my knowledge, several documentaries about George Romero's career. This was the first, and it sort of tried to cover his whole career and centered on the making of Dawn of
Yeah.
the Dead. And we heard about it, and we went out there in like the worst blizzard I've maybe ever seen, like 12 hours driving to Pennsylvania in blinding snow,
Wow.
and got there and hung out at the mall, and we're totally like happily welcomed. It's like, oh, you heard you need zombies, well, come right in.
Yeah.
um, and I did an interview for a magazine at the time with George, with Ken Faree, with Scott Reininger, with like most of the key people, Tom Savini. Everybody was like very nice. It was very relaxed. George had already shot, as far as we knew, maybe like enough to make the movie. He was sort of in a stage now where he's just trying to get a little money, and he was testing out ideas and seeing where he might be able to change the. He was, I think, as he was making it, he was realizing how much comedy he could put into it. For instance,
Yeah, yeah, because it almost felt like it was kind of a social satire in a way. There was a lot of commentary I felt like about consumerism in.
it totally is. I mean, that's
Yeah.
he's always said that was his intention there.
Mm.
But I think just on the individual level, I mean, I'm in the sequence, for instance, where the biker gang breaks in and they're going to the bakery in the mall and they're hitting zombies with pies, and I get hit in the face with seltzer, so I can claim to have like a shot that that's me, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But we also had no inkling as to whether or not the scene would remain in the picture, and it did.
Mm.
And that sort of showed that he was willing, because he was shooting that, and he was like, this is kind of a crazy idea. I realize it. I don't know if it's going to work, but
Yeah. So also Street Trash the year after. Now I saw Street Trash for the very first time last year. I believe you actually appeared in that film.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you get a certain appendage removed?
Yes, I'm in an infamous dismemberment scene. In fact, that's my character, dismembered derelict.
Oh, that's what you're actually credited as.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's
kind of weird shooting that scene. Was that kind of like a weird kind of scene to shoot, or
not really? I mean, I was running around with like a standard, by most people's judgment, a standard rubber dildo, even though it was made specifically for this picture and this scene.
Yeah.
I think at the time, I mean, we knew it was going way, way over any boundaries at the
Yeah.
But it ultimately it paid off. I've never seen like an audience that didn't like get the right sense of fun out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because at the time, I mean, people were offended by it. I mean, people couldn't handle it. Despite the fact that people melt into puddles of blue and yellow goo,
Yeah.
they somehow still equated it with like actual blood and guts.
Yeah. It's certainly one of the most out there films I've seen, and that's a compliment, because it's a film that stands out from the crowd from so many other movies.
Well, consider also it's like it's a fairly like old film at this point, and it still outrages people.
Yeah.
I mean, I found out in more recent times, I've had people who told me, "Oh, well, I really liked it, and it wasn't too offensive for me." Oh, except it shows the homeless in a poor light.
Well, where did the inception for the film come from? Because I know it started life as a short, but where did the whole idea come from?
Jimmy Muro, who directed it, who went on to become like a top Hollywood director of photography, Steadicam operator, etc. He did the short. He had some thoughts about wanting to do a feature film, so this was his way to do it. Roy Frumkes was his teacher at the time, School of Visual Art in New York City, and so he did the short. And based on that, Roy did most of the money raising. We shot in the auto wrecking yard that was owned by Jimmy's dad in Brooklyn. Yes, I was about to say Queens, and that whole production, it was interesting because I came off of Street Trash and Roy was like, "Oh, I want you to do this film with me," and I was like totally like, "All right, well, okay, fine. I'm sure you'll have the money in a year." I somehow believed that there would be no question of the money being raised. That's not always the case. My optimism for once paid off, and a year later, I was working on Street Trash.
And it's quite easy to see why it's got a cult following. I can fully understand why.
Well, yeah, I mean, it still packs a punch. Plus, I honestly have felt from the start, it was a well-made film for the budget it was made at. It has the camera work, just the shot coverage, the lighting. I mean, it has a little more going for it than so many other films. Plus, it's just so damn different.
Yeah, and there's quite a few themes in the film as well that the movie touches upon. I'm not sure if we can say them on this episode, but there's some homeless people who are trying to do something to a certain character. There's a scene involving, I'm not sure if it was a police officer or not. There's a scene involving necrophilia. Can we say that?
Yes. That was Roy wrote the script. He knew this was like all going to be like, holy fuck.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
Uh,
There was even a
and I
scene.
have to say, it's interesting because that scene is, I mean, there were people who objected to it at the time.
Mm.
There were a lot of people who didn't object to it, including women.
Yeah.
And now we're in a time where, socially people are more conscious of certain things. And I don't know how, totally they would condemn it at this point. It's
Mm.
kind of indefensible.
We're kind of like, we seem to be in that age now that like it's almost like we're being told to be desensitized from, because what we get
Right.
away, what Hollywood can get away with on screen now, like 20, 30, 40 years ago was just, unbelievable. But
Well, I'm astounded by the fact that a show like The Walking Dead
mm,
can have like essentially like gore scenes that would be torture pornography a few years earlier.
yeah, yeah, and it's a very commercially big successful show, and yeah, it's almost like, as you say, so much more is thrown in front of our eyes nowadays than it was 2030. But with Street Trash as well, there was another moment I wanted to talk about that was like, wow.
Yeah.
And it's the bit where the police officer, I believe it is, when he vomits over the guy's head.
Yeah, again, that was like, I think that was Roy thinking, all right, how can I add a topper to this scene
Yeah.
that people will be like helpless to try and figure out what they've just seen. They've never seen this before.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to report I really enjoyed it, and my missus absolutely loved it. And I've actually got a work colleague as well who is a massive fan of that film. And when I told him that you're coming onto the podcast, he was like, yeah, green with envy.
I mean, I sort of think it's not quite as shocking in the same way at this point, because I think society, in terms of the shock value in mainstream entertainment, has caught up to it to a great degree.
Yeah. But certainly for its time. I mean, with Spookies, did you ever imagine, even a few years ago, did you ever imagine Spookies would be getting an official Blu-ray release?
Well, yes, to tell the truth, myself and my late partner, Thomas Doran, spent many years tracking down the ownership, because it seemed to be owned by various parties at various times. And the last actual record we had was of it being sold to Vestron Video in the mid 90s. And that's with the Library of Congress. And then from there, it was kind of vague. And the whole time, what we were hoping was, gee, we just hope Michael hasn't gotten the rights back and that he owns it again, because he would never cooperate in any way if we wanted to try and get a new version out there.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be the case. Fortunately, let's see, my partner Tom passed away a few years back in the midst of our campaign to do this. And then a couple of years later, I heard from some guys I actually knew, Mike Gingold, Glenn Baisley, who who are horror mavens and who did our Spookies documentary. And they said, hey, we're getting together to do this Spookies documentary of Vinegar Syndrome here in the States, bought the rights. And on one hand, I was like frustrated. I was like, I've been trying to figure out a way to do this. And the other hand, it was like, all right, now it's happening. These are two cool guys that I like, and it'll be fine.
Yeah. And I'm glad we got that documentary because it really shows the bigger picture. And there's actually, I believe, another documentary on there.
That is a documentary essentially about the history of Vipco.
Okay.
The company of our backer, Michael Lee. That's how he made his fortune in the video nasties industry of the 80s. That's sort of his legacy. He was like really the man to go to if you wanted your band movies at the time.
Does Street Trash have a Blu-ray release?
Yeah, several. I mean, all over the world. I mean, it's like I believe 2, possibly 3 so far in the US. There was just a German edition that came out like a year ago that had a bottle of the Viper. In it.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I mean, of the projects obviously you've worked on, I believe there was another movie. I believe it was released. Was it the same year as Spookies?
You'd have to fill me in on which one you're talking about.
There was another movie, I believe it was released in '86. I haven't actually got it written down, unfortunately. But there was another movie. It's one that I'd not heard of, and I believe it may have been released between Spookies and Street Trash.
I mean, myself and my partners worked on various things. I'm not
Mm.
sure if you're thinking of, I mean, it could be anything from, I mean, Brendan and I directed scenes for the film Tales That Will Tear Your Heart Out,
Okay.
which wound up years later as the title sequences to the film Dr. Butcher, MD,
All right.
which is the Italian movie Zombie Holocaust.
Yeah, yeah. So what kind of this is the big question, because you said to me quite recently actually that you're very much kind of, you see, a bit of a film historian. You're into cinema.
I mean, I watch everything. I read everything. I mean, I have a specific interest in the early years of motion pictures, the development of the art form, silent films, early sound films. I think but at the same time, foreign films from all ages, anything that's obscure or relatively unknown that seems interesting to me, I
Yeah.
seek out. And for years, that was like a real chore. You had to get in touch with other collectors,
Mm.
similar tastes to get to a lot of things. But nowadays, I mean, almost every film from every country is out on video, or will be at some point out on video.
Yeah, and I suppose with the internet as well, it's a lot easier to find these. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube is probably has the biggest movie library of any place on the
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah. I've discovered quite a few obscure giallos. I'm a big giallo fan.
Right, and a lot of stuff shouldn't legally be there, but it is. And
Yeah. So I'm going to ask, what's one of your all-time favorite horror movies? I know it's really hard to pinpoint one, but what's one that you?
my tastes are like sort of all over the place in that I have a great interest in the early years of film, and I have a bit, and I grew up on things like the Universal horror films,
Oh, brilliant! Yeah.
And the Hammer films and stuff. So I have a very very much an attachment to things that convey a real sense of atmosphere and place, and
Yeah.
it's like you have a feeling about what's happening before anything happens. And I think that's less prominent probably, not just recently, but I think for a long time since that time, since the real age of television, really.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorites from that period is, 1922's Nosferatu, like, the granddaddy of vampire.
Yeah, Nosferatu, when I collected movies as a kid, Nosferatu was one of the first films I had. So I've sort of grown up with Nosferatu, and I've watched it through the years become visually better and better looking as they've done various restorations.
Yeah, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, looks incredible on Blu-ray. I mean, the
I've seen that restoration. It's just it's like an entirely different film. But I think that it's important to do that with older films because it makes it much more accessible. I mean, even as someone who I'll sit through the worst copy of anything just to see it, but a lot of times it's very difficult, and you just wish that there was a decent image to look at.
Yeah, there is a lost film that London After Midnight, Lon Chaney.
I was actually just about to say I'm a huge Lon Chaney fan. I almost always have been. That was one of the first things I sort of latched onto as a kid. And he's not many people are aware because they haven't seen because he did a lot of non-horror roles, etc. But he was an incredibly versatile actor. If he had lived into the sound era, I think he'd be certainly far more famous than he already is.
Yeah, I mean, 1925's Phantom of the Opera, the unmasking. I mean, how terrifying would that have been back in 1925?
Well, people were a lot less jaded, a lot.
Yeah.
and I think because it's interesting because I've read like reviews of certain films at that time, and the critics will mention how creepy something is or how shocking, and to you and me it's nothing.
Yeah. So are there any horror movies out there, let's say on a first time experience, that scared you? And are there any horror movies that really kind of like put you on?
This is a sad thing for me to admit, but it's rare that I see an actual movie that scares me.
Okay.
I'm more affected by a director's ability to create suspense. Because I think that, and I'm more like, I sort of frown on jump scares while they can be useful at times.
Yeah.
It just sort of, I think for some films, they just seem like something, we can always just fall back and do this.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to do. And jump scares are not hard. All you have to do is, stand someplace and wait for your friend to walk up and jump out and go boo. You
Exactly.
succeed.
I've been saying that to Pete a long time. I think the genre has become over reliant on it, and jump scares can be executed well, but I think sometimes it's when there's no build up, it's just jump,
Right.
quite
Well, I'm
jump.
sure you've seen, like me, you've seen dozens of films where it's, it builds up something and it's a jump scare, and then it's a jump scare, and they'll
Yeah.
repeat it like 5 or 6 times in the first third of the movie.
Yeah, there was actually The Nun, part of the Conjuring universe. That was a great example of that kind of movie, in my opinion. It like the movie takes no time in getting to the jump scares, and it's
Right.
literally. I don't think there's probably more than 3 minutes that go by without actually having a jump scare. Yeah,
Hmm.
so I just yeah, but it was again, it was a big box office hit. It was the most successful film of the Conjuring universe, and
So that means you're going to get more of the same, and
yeah.
I don't know. I think audiences' tastes have been changed to a certain extent, where that's the sort of film that they almost expect,
Mm.
so they're not disappointed.
Yeah, exactly. And CG as well, I find, especially in the horror genre. I know that CG is unavoidable in some cases with certain genres,
and
but
and it works fine in some cases.
yeah, if used kind of like sparingly. But there's a lot of horror movies that I see nowadays where the CG I just find quite jarring and quite detracting. And I'm a big fan of practical. I love practical effects. And the 80s especially was a great decade where we saw a lot of
Right.
great practical coming
I
out.
I think that's, in a way, that's a trend that, like, a lot of the industry has. Even, I mean, there's a big return to practical effects in many films, or they'll combine CGI and practical. Um, I think practical certainly here to stay, though. Ultimately, for certain things, the costs are just going to be far less, because when you're doing practical effects, you spend most of your time waiting for them to work.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite director? Is there any director that you?
Have a lot of famous directors. I mean, many. I mean, off the top of my head, people like Sergio Leone,
Mm,
Orson Welles,
yeah,
Stanley Kubrick, uh, Michael Curtiz, who I think should be up there with them, and most people don't even know who he is. He directed, among other things, Casablanca,
yeah,
and I think, is one of the directors most responsible for creating the way that film stories are told,
mm,
because he was doing sophisticated stuff from, before the 1920s over in
yeah,
Europe, and then he came over here, and then he made, movies here for like 30 years.
yeah,
And he just had a great sense of knowing, all right, here's where you put the camera, here's where you cut, here's what you have to emphasize, here's what you have to not emphasize. And
yeah,
that's all that movie directing really is.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, Hitchcock's one of mine. Do you? Are you? I'm assuming possibly a Hitchcock
Yeah,
fan.
Hitchcock is certainly up there. Yeah. The one thing I'll say something that not many people might agree on with Hitchcock.
Okay.
Hitchcock was a genius and had an amazing style, but his style was more obvious than a lot of directors. It's like, because even if you, like, ever listen to Hitchcock's interviews, where he explains in great detail what he was doing and how he did it and why he cut to this and did that. And if you watch his film, it is more obvious. It's not like there's anything you're going to miss. It's all like boom, 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 and it works and it's great. But I think other directors might have a style that is less obvious. Oops, oh, sorry, that
Yeah,
was
it's
an
okay,
alarm.
man. But
That have less, overt, signs where you can say, oh, this is a such and such film. But
yeah,
I like directors that do have that distinctive style. It's why I like someone like Leone, whose films I think are just, his films are like another universe. The way he shoots and cuts and uses his actors.
yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, with Hitchcock, I think he helped kind of mold the thriller genre as we've come to
Oh,
kind of know it. A
very
huge
much so. Yeah.
influence, and I know obviously Brian De Palma was a very much an ardent Hitchcock fan, and that's very
Yeah,
nice.
I've always had mixed feelings about De Palma for his Hitchcock fetish, because he, in the prime of his career, he was like just stealing entire scenes from Hitchcock and not like making any bones about it. He was just, yeah, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah, especially films like Sisters, Dressed to Kill, because that's very much Psycho, isn't it? I mean, that's basically, I,
Right.
I
I mean,
suppose it's a fine line.
and I also feel that his earlier films, are a lot more interesting than the films later in his career.
Mm.
that he was trying to be more I mean, my favorite De Palma film probably is Phantom of the Paradise.
Oh, do you know what? I only watched again. That's another film I was late to the party for. I watched it for the first time last year,
Yeah,
and I
it's a
enjoyed it.
hell of a lot of fun. It seems like way ahead of its time in many
Yeah,
ways.
but it
You
doesn't
know,
really get talked about much, does it? Really, in comparison
right,
to
no, and I think it's got all, the horror chops, but I think it's also got a really good music track.
yeah, yeah, I agree. So I mean, De Palma is one of them directors that obviously covered many genres over the years and out doing big Hollywood films, going to like Mission Impossible and obviously Untouchables, great film, and
Right. I feel his career sort of maybe peaked around the time of The Untouchables, because I feel like
mm,
he, almost everything subsequently just didn't have as much going for it, in my
yeah.
opinion.
So quickly to get back to Spookies. Now I've been hearing rumblings that a Spookies 2 is being written.
There will not be a Spookies 2,
Okay.
because it will be called something other than Spookies 2.
Oh, okay. But there is a screenplay, a script actually being written.
I am working on it. I was working on it before speaking with you, and I'll be working on it as soon as I get off.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. So are you kind of like, are you obviously still in touch with a lot of the people
I
from?
am. I am in touch with a number of people. I mean, most of them you saw in the documentary. The two actors that are still pretty much around and have been part of the revival were Nick Gianta, who played Duke in Spookies,
Hmm,
and Anthony Valbiro, who played the character David. And they've enthusiastically, been a part of things and wanted to contribute, etc. Certain other guys like our comedy relief character, Peter Isillo, who would have, if he were still, he passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, but if he
hmm,
was still alive, he would be like the largest promoter of Spookies on earth.
yeah.
He was so into Spookies, even though we all felt a great disappointment.
Yeah, he was very. I saw the documentary, and he was very. What's the word I'm looking for? Very. I think jovial was the word you used. He was very kind of the life and soul of the party, and
Well, he just, I think he always had even though he was like a million other actors, and like his, didn't have like a hugely successful career, he was always into, like before the internet, promoting himself, and always had, was always cheerful, and eventually, to tell the truth, before he died, he had really started to develop some reputation as a character actor, and had a distinct look, and it's too bad he didn't get to continue with that.
yeah. But the people in the documentary that I saw, the fellow cast members and that, there seemed to be. I got the impression there was a good working relationship. That they seemed to be.
Yeah, I mean, well, as I said, we knew some of the cast members prior to the shoot, and Tom and Brendan I had been working with for years, and a lot of the connected people were people we had worked with briefly on other things, or at least knew that we had met and wanted to work with them someday. Um, yeah, I mean, it was a real different, I would say, than a lot of low budget shoots where a producer just gets some money, hires somebody, and then everybody sort of comes in cold and has there's not the same sense of camaraderie in many situations.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, and to tell the truth, that's in a weird way that's what's happened with the resurgence of interest in the film,
Mm,
in that
It's 2 o'clock.
people seem to have a very warm attitude towards it. Like I said, there's really very nostalgic, especially if they saw it as kids or saw it I've had so many people just say, I never saw it, but I always remember the box in the video store.
yeah. Yeah.
And I feel that type of thing is amazing on a shoot, and it's been just amazing in terms of what has been happening with the film in the past year and a half or so, in terms of people,
Yeah. I
just
mean,
coming out of the woodwork to tell me they love this. It's one of their favorites.
that must be nice to hear, though, that people,
It
even
made all
though
the
I know
difference.
there's obviously some disappointment your end, I can fully understand that, but there are people out there that still appreciate what you did, and understand that.
Well, that's very gratifying. And right now, the fact that there's enough interest that I have started to write a follow up, um, I feel that's sort of given me a new lease on career, because things had wound down. Spookies was, as is outlined in our documentary, it did nothing whatsoever for the careers of any of us. It was an obstacle in the path.
Yeah. Okay, one final question. How many times did you end up on the pinhead reel? The pinhead wheel, sorry.
I think just once.
Oh, just once.
And it's really, and I have no idea how I did, since usually it was reserved for people who were on the camera crew who screwed up,
Okay.
or an actor. So you sort of had to be like right there, in front of her behind the camera. I guess I was on the set and did something.
All right. So what were the usual kind of screw ups then? What were the kind of
It could be anything. You missed a cue as an actor. You forgot a line. You didn't do the camera move right. You forgot something you were told to do by the director of photography. And this was all under the jurisdiction of Ken Kelch, our director of photography.
Yeah.
who just, I think, because this was like his career was like, he had already been a rising cinematographer at that time.
Yeah.
And we were a little lower budget than I think he had gotten used to. So I think he had like a lot of like fun at our expense. So to speak.
Yeah, so keeping up morale and that, but
it did. Any low budget movie, it can become like a real trial, meaning you just start to like wear out. You get fed up with things. You have to constantly make up for shortfalls of money and time.
yeah.
But in the same way, it becomes something that it's like a difficult time you experience with other people. It brings you close to them.
Yeah. I think we're going to probably have to wrap it up for today.
Yeah,
Frank.
you've gone longer than you told me you would.
We have gone a lot longer. The time just flies by when you're having fun. I mean, it's like, almost an hour, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been absolutely brilliant.
Obviously, a lot more I could say, and I feel like I skipped over a couple of things, but you're certainly welcome to endure me again if you'd like.
Yeah, we could certainly do a sequel. As Stu said in Scream, these days you've got to have a sequel.
Yes.
But it's been brilliant having you here and that, and we'll certainly keep in touch.
Well, I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, it's been great, I think that's pretty much it for today. I will say to everyone listening, Spookies is now officially out on Blu-ray. Certainly worth buying.
Yes, it's been available in the USA for about a year and a half. It is, from what I was told by someone today, I can't confirm this, it will be available on Shudder starting at the end of May. So that might be one way that people who haven't seen it can get to it. And I personally, if you need to get me for some reason, I'm on Facebook under my own name.
Yeah. And I'm just glad. I'm glad it's a lot more accessible, and I'm glad this film is actually getting attention, getting more.
It has, and like I said, it's given my career a new life, and it's a huge boost to my whole well-being to have people not only thankful for work I did, but eager to see my new work.
Yeah. Okay then. That's it for today then. Thanks a lot, Frank. Thanks for taking time out to do this. And we'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. Take care.
Take care, everybody.